He looked at me like he already knew what I was thinking, and I didn't look away. My mornings start the same way they have for the last 17 years. The coffee pot hisses to life at 6:30, the front porch light flips on, and my husband's footsteps echo down the stairs with the same rhythm that used to make me smile in bed. These days, I barely hear them. He still kisses me goodbye before leaving for work, a soft, distracted press of lips to cheek, like he's trying to remember how affection works. It isn't unkind. It's just routine. A practiced motion. Like brushing teeth. We're fine. That's what I always say. He pays the bills. I fold the laundry. We host his family on holidays and pretend the wine makes it easier. The kids are grown now, 2 states away and living lives they don't need us for. The house has grown quieter in their absence, but I pretend I like the stillness. I fill it with podcasts, with gardening, with long walks where I nod at neighbors, but never stop long enough to chat. I suppose I should have noticed the silence in me before someone else did. It was early April when he moved in next door. I was out back, coaxing my stubborn hydrangeas into bloom when I saw the moving truck. I don't usually care who comes and goes. We live in one of those neighborhoods where people wave from across the street but don't ask questions. But he waved, and he asked. Just a simple, "Hey, what's the secret to getting grass like that?" I looked up, unsure if he meant it or if it was just small talk. But his eyes didn't flick away like most men's do when they've said their piece. He held the gaze. I remember laughing, saying something about fertilizer and patience. He said, "Sounds like life," and then smiled in that quiet way people do when they've said more than they intended to. His name was Brian. Divorced, maybe mid-40s, with one daughter who stayed with him every other weekend. He wasn't striking in the way that made you stop, not tall or loud or showy. But he had a calm presence, like he was listening even when you weren't speaking. He worked from home, something tech-related, and I'd see him most mornings, barefoot on his deck with a mug in hand. Sometimes shirtless, sometimes humming. Never rushed. I caught myself watching him once from behind the curtains, just for a second too long. And when I looked away, my cheeks flushed like a schoolgirl's. We talked more after that. Little things at first. The weather, the garden, the way the HO always found new rules to enforce. But then it was, "How long have you lived here? Do you like it? What do you do all day when it's just you and the garden?" Questions my husband hadn't asked in years. One morning, I was pruning roses when he walked up and just stood by the fence, hands resting casually on the top rail. "You always look so focused out here," he said. I shrugged. "It's easier than thinking." He nodded slowly, like he understood more than he should. That's when it started, that subtle shift in the air between us. I didn't dress differently. I didn't change my routine. But I noticed more. I noticed the way he tilted his head when he laughed. The faint scar near his eyebrow. The way his voice dropped slightly when he asked about my day. And he noticed me too. Not just the way I looked, though I'd caught his gaze trailing once or twice, but me. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" he asked once. It was a strange question, tossed out like a stone into a quiet lake. I hesitated. "I think we all do sometimes." He said nothing, just nodded. That night, I lay awake in bed, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan and wondering what I would have said if I hadn't been scared to answer truthfully. The next week, he offered to help me carry bags of mulch from the car. I told him I could manage, but he insisted, brushing past me with a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just his hands or his strength. It was the way he didn't treat me like I was invisible, like I wasn't just someone's wife. "I'm surprised your husband doesn't help with all this," he said, not unkindly. "He works a lot," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked. "Yeah, but do you?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know what that question even meant. It became a dance. A quiet, careful one. He'd ask me about music, and I'd find myself digging through old playlists. He'd mention a book, and I'd check it out from the library, pretending I'd meant to read it anyway. One afternoon, he handed me a cutting from his own garden. Said you wanted color by the back gate. I hadn't told him that. Not aloud. That night, I sat outside longer than usual, watching the stars blur through the haze of wine and wanting. We never touched. Not even once. But there were moments I felt his breath in the space between us. Felt the heat of his presence when he stood just a little too close. One Saturday, I stepped out to water the garden. I hadn't seen him all day. Part of me hoped I wouldn't. The other part. He was there, leaning against his porch railing, arms crossed. "You always come out here when you need to think?" he asked. I smiled. "And you always watch from over there?" He didn't laugh. He stepped down from the porch and walked toward the fence. "I think you're more than what you let people see," he said. His voice was low, unapologetic. I set the hose down, hands suddenly unsure what to do. "You don't even know me," I said. "I know enough," he replied. Then added, "And I see the rest." He reached over the fence, his hand open, waiting. Not demanding, not assuming, just there. I looked at it, then up at him. He waited for me to speak. I didn't. And that silence said too much. I woke up before the sun. The garden was still in shadow, but something inside me was already lit in the wrong kind of way. The moment replayed in my head like an old film reel. His hand over the fence. That look in his eyes. The silence I gave him, too full to be innocent. I didn't take his hand, but I didn't walk away either. And that was its own kind of betrayal. That night, I got into bed long after my husband. He stirred, barely awake, and asked, "Everything okay?" I said, "Yeah." Just stayed out a bit longer. The moon was nice. He murmured something I didn't catch and turned over. Back toward the wall. The next morning, I made the coffee just like always. 1 spoon of sugar in his, none in mine. The radio played soft jazz in the background, and I stood by the window watching the garden bloom like it had any idea what was happening to me. Everything on the outside still looked the same. But I had changed, and it wasn't because of him, not entirely. It was what he woke up in me. That sense of being seen. Noticed. Not as a wife. Not as a woman who gets things done. But as someone with thoughts, with feelings, with hunger. We didn't speak for 2 days. He didn't come out onto the porch. And I didn't water the garden. It was almost like we were both waiting for the moment to pass, like a summer storm we could outlast by staying indoors. But it didn't pass. It sank into the soil, into the air, into everything. On the 3rd day, I saw him again. He was kneeling by his flower bed, hands deep in the dirt, like he was trying to bury something. When he saw me, he didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just looked. And I walked over. I didn't know what to say that night. I said quietly, like the words didn't belong out loud. He didn't get up. Just kept his hands in the soil and said, "You didn't have to." I heard everything in that silence. Then he stood, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked at me like he was memorizing my face. "I'm not here to make your life harder," he said. "But I'm also not going to pretend that this didn't mean something." My breath caught in my throat. He added, "I think we both needed to remember who we are when no one's looking." We didn't touch. Not even then. But I swear I could feel where he almost did. Like the memory of his fingertips hovered just above my skin. That evening, my husband and I had dinner at the table. Just the two of us, like always. He asked about the garden. I gave short answers. He told me about a new guy at work. I nodded. At one point, I looked up from my plate and saw him staring at me. Not at my face, but through it. Like he was seeing something he hadn't noticed before. "Are you okay?" he asked, frowning. I'm fine, I lied. Just tired. That night, I found an old book of poems I used to love. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside was a pressed flower from when the kids were little. I don't know why, but I cried, quietly, alone in the den, while the house buzzed with the dull hum of a life too still to notice. A week passed. I avoided the fence, the porch, him. But emotions don't just evaporate. They ferment. And guilt. Guilt grows roots. Then it happened. One night, my husband came into the kitchen holding my phone. He wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling. He just said, "You left this on the counter." I took it, smiling. "Thanks." But he didn't leave. He just looked at me long and slow and said, "Is there something you want to tell me?" My heart dropped into my stomach. He wasn't guessing. He knew. Not from texts. Not from photos. From me. From something in my voice, or my eyes, or the way I'd drifted too far without meaning to. I swallowed. "No," I said. Too quickly. He nodded once. That was all. And then he walked out of the room. He didn't bring it up again. But things were different. He stopped kissing me goodbye. Stopped asking what I wanted for dinner. Stopped waiting for me at night. I disappeared from him long before that moment. But now he finally saw it. One afternoon, I came home and found my wedding ring sitting on the bathroom sink. He wasn't gone. Not yet. But something between us was. I stood by the garden that night, holding the hose, staring into nothing. And I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. It was Brian. We didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. He looked at me with that same quiet, knowing, the kind that says, "I see you." And for the first time, I looked back and said, "I can't undo it." He nodded. "I know." Then he left. And I stayed. The next morning, I found the faucet still running. The hose curled like a question mark around my feet. The garden was soaked. Overwatered. Like I'd tried too hard to bring something back to life. He left the ring on the sink. I left the rest.